Okay, great. So our next speaker is in person, present here with us. Yeah, we're glad to have Pauline Picot here with us on her talk, Post-Growth and from Technological Diversity for Growth to Techno-Diversity in Post-Growth. Pauline is a PhD student in the laboratory on interdisciplinary research on society, technology, environment interactions at the University of Technology in Troyes. She has a degree in mechanical engineering and philosophy and is now doing her PhD on the concept of technodiversity in order to develop and analyze technology and its evolution. And yeah, we're very excited to dive deeper in the topics mentioned in the title and how we can maybe take those concepts into account for our research, for fiction abstracts for the rest of the week. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Yes. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today and giving me this time to introduce my work. So as you said, I'm working on a particular concept that is technodiversity. Okay, is it better? Yeah. Well, so as I was saying, I'm working on a particular concept that is technodiversity, but that will be rather for the end of my presentation. And to begin, I will rather speak about diversity in general, because to my mind, you cannot speak about transition, ecological or not, if you're not speaking about diversity. If you want to move from unsustainable ICT towards sustainable one, that supposes that different technologies are possible, different models of technologies, different conception of technologies are possible, thus that technological diversity exists. And from this perspective, we can consider that technological diversity is a prerequisite for the ecological transition and for any transition. And actually, from the point of view of an engineer, so you mentioned that I'm a mechanical engineer, it is an obvious thing to say that there are several ways to achieve an engineering project. So to this end, in regard to the ecological transition, a technological diversity may be something to be promoted, to be valued, to be sought for. But actually, in our current dominant technological model that is inscribed in an economy that seeks for growth, technological diversity can as well be promoted and be seen as a companion for growth, as it participates in the discourses around innovation. And in this sense, diversity will mean doing something new, doing as well more, so participating into growth. And so here we have a contradiction, and it is this contradiction that I propose to explore today in this presentation. I will have one hypothesis. This is that ecological transition requires a shift of technology toward post-growth. I will not discuss whether or not green growth is a plausible scenario. I think that François did it very brilliantly just before me. And so my main question for this talk will be which technological diversity could be valued to move toward post-growth, so in regard to this contradiction. And so to address this question, I will structure my speech into three parts. First, I will explore what is meant by technological diversity nowadays in general, in let's say mainstream engineering, that is an engineering that is inscribed in an economy for growth. Then I will introduce to you the work of Olivier Hamon, a biologist that developed the concept of sub-optimality in contradiction with the idea and seeking for optimization. He's doing so by using an analogical reasoning, and that is a kind of reasoning that will be very useful to me for the third part of my presentation, in which I will elaborate my own proposal. That will be my answer to the previous question. I will propose to seek for a technodiversity rather than a technological diversity. I will explain the difference. So first, what is meant by technological diversity? My starting point will be a literature review, in which I will ask two questions. First, how is understood technological diversity? And secondly, for what is it or not promoted? I will have one hypothesis. It is that a system of values, or at least a part of it, can be visible in scientific papers. I explain. Imagine that we have a paper that questions the relationship between technological diversities and innovation. These papers will put a positive value into innovation and wonder whether technological diversity participates in it or not. in this point of view, in this paper, we may consider that what is valued in the end is innovation, and that technological diversity is valued as an instrument, a mean to participate to innovation. And so my main aim is in this literature review is to answer the question at the end of this slide: are vast understandings of technological diversity, so the one that will be found in literature, embedded into a system of value that promotes in the end growth or not? And my aim by doing that is then to question whether the way we understand technological diversity today is relevant to a society, a system of values that does not seek for growth, but that is inscribed in post-growth. So I didn't aim to realize an extensive and complete literature review. So you have here the requests I showed. They may seem a bit restrictive. I just intended to get general overview. So I limited my research to the Scopus database, to the publication after 2015, and so to the expression technological diversity and diversification with and without quotation marks. And I attempted to restrict my research to the papers that were related to the ICT field and a bit more generally to engineering and computer science. And so the analysis of the relevant results I had allowed me to distinguish three common ways to understand technological diversity nowadays in academic papers related to engineering and ICT. The first one describes the technological diversity as the diversity of patents that a firm owns. Regarding the American or European systems, patents are classified according to the technological area they concern. Then some researchers have developed index to quantify this diversity of patents. The question there is then whether a firm that has a diversity of classification of patents is more innovative or not. It may be as well question the relation between this diversity of technology and green innovation in particular. But again, green innovation will follow the classification that are proposed by international structures such as the OECD, for example, that have developed tools to identify green relevant innovation. So is this understanding of technological diversity embedded into a seeking for growth, or can it be relevant for the perspective of a post-growth? You may guess that the answer is that it is plainly fully related to growth. And actually, François Briand argued just before that innovation today is mainly focused on profit seeking, that it is a very risky bet toward an ecological transition. And actually, the OECD, for example, described his green innovation explicitly as aiming toward green growth. So growth is here present. I move now to the second class of article that I identified. In these articles, the technological diversity is a property of a network. So it is not anymore related to a firm, but to an ICT network, such as, for example, a network of IoT in a smartphone, in a smart home. It is one example from the literature review. And here we have a variety of motivation behind this study of technological diversity. It is regarded in relation with innovation, again, in particular in the tension between standardization and diversity. What is behind this question is whether standardization inhibits or not diversity and innovation in ICT network. Technological diversity is as well a question in regard of resilience. In this regard, what is questioned is whether a diversity of technology, a diversity of protocols, a diversity of entry points in a network allows for a better resilience or not. And finally, as well for technological convergence between the technological offer of a supplier to potential adopters, thus customers. So as I said before, innovation is still related to seeking for growth and technological convergence in this sense, as what is seeking, is the economic performance is as well related to seeking for growth. But it remains then the seeking for resilience, and here I believe that it is rather a technological requirement rather than an economic motive. To my mind, I do not think that resilience is intrinsically related to a seeking for growth. And so now the third part of my literature review regarding technological diversity as a component of technological evolution. For example, you have here a study that will consider the diversity of technologies that exist at a given time on a market to realize a technical function, to realize a product. And it will study the relative importance of the two or more technologies on this market, and then the technological evolution. So in this perspective, the life cycle of a technology is reduced to the existence of this technology on a market. You have as well some other articles that will consider that the technological diversity of a state, so not a firm, not a market, not a network, but a state, this one as an entity reference, is the result of a successive technological development, technological evolution of a story of this state, for example. And what can be said in this perspective is that actually half of the authors explicitly position their paper in a seeking for growth or competitiveness. And actually as well, the study, as the study of a market, as the study technological evolution that has taken place in an economy that is driven by growth, are embedded into this economy. And so the question of the role of technological diversity in regard of technological evolution in post-growth is at least, I think, to be re-asked. So to sum up this literature review, the only motivation that does not seem to be related to a seeking of growth appear to be the resilience. And I can now move to my second part, in which I will rather speak about post-growth and about one particular author, that is Olivier Hamon. I will use his work to project ourselves in what might be relevant to envisage technology in post-growth. There are two reasons why I chose to speak about him today. The first is that his diagnosis is that one key driver of the Anthropocene is actually our conception of optimization and its seeking. He defines optimization as an improvement of performance, itself being the sum of effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness being related to the capability to reach a goal, and efficiency to the means that are used in reaching this goal, so is more efficient, what uses less to achieve the same result. And he develops the idea that optimization today in regard of the phenomenon that nourish the Anthropocene is becoming self-justified. That means that it is solved for itself, that it is given an intrinsic value. And I believe that this diagnosis is not very far from the diagnosis that one key driver of the Anthropocene is actually growth. Indeed, optimization relates to the idea of intensification. That is one of the two ways a market can grow. Here I follow Timothée Parric in his PhD thesis. And as well, François Briand underlined at the beginning of his presentation today, that the scenario of green growth considers the environment as resources to be optimized. And so the second reason why I chose to speak about Olivier Hamon is his proposal. He's developing, in contrast with the concept of optimization, the concept of sub-optimality. And to my mind, this concept of sub-optimality echoes the same argumentative gesture that is suggested in the expression of post-growth. To my mind, post-growth expresses the movement of projection, but that is always anchored in the present situation as its starting point and motivation. So post-growth expresses a starting point that is a situation marked by the seeking for growth and the idea of going beyond it to project ourselves in a future possible situation. And sub-optimality expresses the same gesture. You have the mark of optimality, optimization, so this present situation that is marked by a lot of optimization, a seeking for optimization, and the idea of going beyond, but that here, rather counterintuitively, takes the form of a sub-optimality, so rather maybe to going below, but not going beyond. So it is already in opposition with our general regular representations. As well, you can remark that sub-optimality refers to a state, whether optimization refers to a process. Then sub-optimality is in opposition with optimization in two ways. And Olivier Hamon is defining as such the sub-optimality, so the capacity of evolving on the long term while using internal weaknesses, not as problem to be circumvented, but as a springboard for adaptability. And I think that in this definition, you can see as well this anchoring in a present situation marked by optimization, this criticism, and the projection beyond it. Olivier Hamon speaks about weakness, and you cannot speak about weakness if not in regard of a name, an objective. However, Olivier Hamon nourishes his proposition of a sub-optimality in regard of the functioning of a living world. He's a biologist. And in natural selection, in the living world, you have not such things as aim or objective. So here you have in this definition the criticism of optimization. And as well, we can understand, thanks to this definition, that what Olivier Hamon aims for is to argue that in regard of achieving adaptability, optimization is not a way to follow. And so I said that Olivier Hamon is a biologist, and actually he will develop and define what is sub-optimality thanks to a certain number of traits that he will observe in the living world. So you can observe that this trait refers all to things that will be depreciated in a rationale of optimization. I will not develop them all, but just develop the ones that are related to my subject today, that is diversity. So heterogeneity, that is an almost synonym for diversity. Fluctuations, that refer to diversity of value around the mean value. And I will add as well randomness due to the way Olivier Hamon speaks about it. And so I will begin with this one. Randomness refers to the way natural selection operates. Actually, thanks to random migration, reproduction, mutations, you have a diversity of individuals that exist among a species. So this diversity is a priori, and only then natural selection occurs and will give advantage to certain individuals rather than others. Thus, individuals have satisfying traits, not the best trait, but only satisfying traits. Olivier Hamon stresses this point as well in regard of sub-optimality and not optimization. So it's not the optimized individuals that are selected, but just the satisfying. And so in this way, the existence of diversity allows for adaptation, allows for the survival of a species through generation, through variation of environments. Second is heterogeneity. And here, Olivier Hamon is developing the example of the growth of plant cells. So I made a little schema here, and actually, the plant cells do not grow at the same speed and in the same direction. That induces some mechanical stresses between cells. And in answer to the stresses, the cells will adapt their growth, their direction and speed of growing. So in this way, heterogeneity allows for information transfer between cells, allow for a kind of proprioception, that is a kind of cell perception, and at a global scale for a coordination in the growth of a plant. And finally, fluctuation. Here, Olivier Hamon is answering the question, the tension that may exist between fluctuation and reproducibility. Because actually, how can you have an organism that is reproducible if it is made from a random process fluctuation? And the answer is in the law of large numbers. That is that this micro variations at the cell level will end at a global scale in a general mean that will allow for reproducibility. And so now what? How this consideration of the living world help us in our question regarding technology in post-growth? In the last chapter of his book, Olivier Amand is using the threats observed in the living world in analogy with our society. He is using them to imagine what could be the components, some components of a post-growth society, and he's identifying some weak signals that exist today in our society, and that function thanks to sub-optimality and not thanks to optimization. So I will not follow here his argumentation, but it is tempting to do the same thing, to use as well analogy to question in which way this diversity that is useful for the living world can be useful for us to imagine technology in a post-growth society, in a post-growth context. And so first, let's speak in a very few seconds what is an analogy. Analogy is actually an identity of relations between entities that do not share necessarily any similarities. They can be totally different as long as you have an identity of relation between two pairs of entity, for example. It is an analogy. So analogy is primarily concerned and only concerned with relation. And actually, biodiversity is an advantage in the biological world as long as it concerns not just a certain amount of entities, but entities in relation. If you think back to the traits of Olivier Amand, randomness and natural selection, then natural selection operates through the interaction of the living beings and their environments. So the living beings that will survive, that will be selected, are the ones that will take enough advantage of their environment by interacting with it to feed themselves, to protect themselves, to reproduce successfully. And so selection can only operate through and thanks to interaction. Then heterogeneity allowed for information transfer. That supposes as well interaction. And finally, fluctuation and reproducibility. An organism by definition, as soon as it is pluricellular, is made of interacting cells. And actually, in general, the biodiversity is in fact the diversity of diversities. It means that you can speak of biodiversity at several scales. You can speak of a genetic diversity. You can speak of a diversity of individuals in a species. You can speak of a diversity among community, a population, an ecosystem, and so on and so on and so on. And these multiple scales, these multiple facets of biodiversity are all in relation with one another. So for example, the genetic diversity will influence the diversity of individuals that exist in a species, and reciprocally, when the selection will operate among species individuals in a species, it will influence the genetic diversity. So you have all this relation. And the consequence of this big object is that biodiversity cannot be studied entirely. When an ecologist is studying biodiversity, he's always studying just a facet or a few facets of it. And he knows that it is in relation with other facets, that it could have chosen another angle, and that there are some relation that he don't know about. And so in analogy, I think that we can now formulate two questions regarding technological diversity. We may look back to the few understandings of technological diversity that I identified in my tutor review, and maybe now consider them as just facets of technological diversity, or maybe of technodiversity. that are maybe related to another, that may be masked over facet of technodiversity, and rather to position them in regard of seeking for growth and take them just as individual facets, individual ways to understand technological diversity, understand them as a facet of a bigger object, of a bigger technodiversity that will call into question the other facets in which it is in relation, and call for question them, for research them, rather than research growth. So the two questions I want to formulate are: what relation do exist between the diverse technological diversities, and what other facets of technological diversity are being masked? And so now let's go back to the results of my chapter review and test if these questions are relevant. What other questions, what other facets of technological diversity do they bring? So first, we had an understanding of technological diversities among the innovations of a firm. I will here just get a broader view, not just the patenting innovation, but the innovation of a firm. It can be related to a human component, to the diversity of technical and technological knowledge and know-hows that contributed to the innovation, themselves being just a part of the diversity of technical and technological knowledge and know-hows that may find in a firm thanks and due to the different workers and their collaborations. So technological diversity can be in this way understood in a human sense. It can be as well related to the materiality of innovation, to the diversity of technical processes and materials that are used in the application of one innovation, in its development. Regarding ICT, that brings the crucial points of their materiality from which it couldn't exist. And now, if you think back to the technological diversity as understood in line with technological evolution, so that was rather considered as the technological diversity that exists for a product on the market, we can here question whether the life cycle of a technology is really just limited to its existence of the market. If you think back to the materiality question, the answer is obviously no. And actually, as an engineer, the life cycle of a technology that I learned at school was rather something like that. So design, manufacturing, distribution, use, and end of life. So this question of the materiality of a technology and of the human that interacts with it can be asked at each step of this line of the life cycle. But I would like as well to question in particular the end of this line, the end of life. The end of life, I learned that it is the point at which a technological artifact, a technology in general, ceases, stops to fulfill the function it has been designed for. But does it mean that it stops to exist? Nothing is less sure. Again, it is a material, and technodiversity calls for considering this materiality. Victor Petit, who is my supervisor, proposes to call closed waste the objects that resist the 3R, that is, objects that are not repairable, that are not reusable, that are not recyclable. And this notion of an end of life makes possible the existence of such objects. As an engineer, I have been used to position my activities at the beginning of this line, at the design phase. However, that means that from the beginning of the design of an object, of a technology, this scheme is already in mind. That is that this design may not explicitly target, but have in mind this destination toward an end of life. And what I would like to propose is actually to replace this notion of an end of life maybe to an opening of possibilities, to question what happens of a technology that arrives at this end of life, what happens to them, and in which way can they be transformed again. And so in this perspective, maybe design should aim rather for an opening of possibilities. And here you have another point of analogy with biodiversity. That is that at a given time, biodiversity opens a certain amount of possibilities of future evolution of the living, of the biodiversity. So it offers the possibility of several future biodiversity. And maybe we should think of technology in the same way, design them in regard of the future technodiversity that it will allow. And so let's now move to the last understanding of technological diversity that I had at the beginning of my presentation, the technological diversity as understood as a property of an ICT network. Here, so you have first the question of materiality that still exists, and that poses as well the question of the interactions between technology and users. And here, maybe instead of a predetermined trajectory from designer, engineer to user, we may think of a diversity of technological practices, of a diversity of relationship between technology and the people that will interact with it at later step of the life cycle. So I choose this expression of technological practices in two ways. First, it is my bigger polygon here in regard of the diversity of cosmotechnics. And here I'm echoing the perspective of philosopher Yu Kui. Yu Kui is a Chinese philosopher who developed the concept, the idea that each technology is always inscribed in a cosmology, that each technology is a cosmotechnics. That is that the starting point is that human beings are cultural beings and that it exists a diversity of culture around this planet. Then there is a diversity of ways to perceive technology, to understand it, and a diversity of expectation regarding technology. And he analyzes the cosmology of Europe and China, to illustrate and demonstrate his thesis. Very briefly, he describes the European cosmology as crossed by dualism. We think of human against nature, and in this scheme, technology is to protect human against nature. Our cosmology is as well very influenced by geometry. We understand the world as being described geometrically, and that plays as well a role in the way we understand and we design technique. However, in the Chinese tradition, in the Chinese philosophical text, it is all about harmony. The world is a global harmony, and technology is not against this harmony, does not make human as an exception in this harmony of nature, but participants in the harmony, must participate in it. It takes the form of a moral imperative. So you have here two very different ways to understand technology and two very different expectations toward it. And so he develops then the idea that each technology is then cosmotechnic as long as it is inscribed in this cosmology. Yeah, it's perfect. And that when you export a technology, you export as well the cosmotechnique in which it is embedded. That means that there is no universal technology, that there is no one technology that will suit the whole of humanity. And it says as well that we are not only in a utility relationship toward technology. Our relationship toward technology as well imply symbolic word, ethical question, cosmological considerations. And the other way in which I wanted to speak about technological practices is in opposition between the traditional scheme of design user, but instead to consider a diversity of practices. And actually this completes and continue the transformation of a life cycle has started. It questions the point at which we position this opening of possibility. And maybe we could deconstruct this step of using and maybe consider that technology as we conceive it, as we design it, will then be transformed by the person that will interact with it later. And so I will stop here. This is, I think, I hope, a tool of thinking. I hope that you can get some maybe inspiration in it. I just wanted to maybe challenge a bit the way we understand technology. And my answer to the question is, to the question I introduced at the beginning of my presentation, is to seek for techno-diversity rather than technological diversity. The difference between both are that techno-diversity suggested that there are multiple facets of technological diversity, that we can never look at them as a whole, entirely. They are all in relation with one another. So thinking of techno-diversity brings the question of with what technology interacts. And so I hope that I have demonstrated that it calls to question the diversity of culture, the diversity of practice that we have of technology, and the materiality that is on which the technology relies on. This is an open canvas. So if you have criticism, remarks, or anything, I will be very glad to hear them. And just to conclude, so technodiversity aims for me to value relations, as I argued it, openness in the way that you consider technology as an opening for future evolutions and not predetermined use and then end of life, and openness as well on this figure on the left, in the mean that you can complete it, that there may be some other facets, some other way to understand technological diversities, some other relation to question. And my last value that I want to propose is indetermination, because this says that as we cannot study entirely technodiversity, there is no determinism, so that our models are always limited, and so that an optimal, I come back to the analysis of Olivier Armand, existing model, but maybe not exist in reality because of these interactions, because of the fact that technodiversity is always beyond our microscope, is always beyond the model we have. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for this very, very interesting talk. Can we have a raise of hands where we want to go with the microphones? We have one there, one over there. Right now, so let's start maybe in the middle here. Oh, okay, up top.
Where are the questions? Oh, okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, how can we know how much energy and resources technodiversity would use comparing to the optimization we have now?
Actually, my answer will be that you cannot know, and think understand technodiversity rather as a concept, as a way of thinking, rather than something that had been quantified. My point was that thinking of technodiversity calls into questions relations, so the social consequences of technology, for example, its materiality, yes, but it does not suggest that complete quantifying of it is possible. So I'm not as well saying that this is sufficient, and through this materiality dimension, maybe is and surely is to be added, seeking for sobriety, seeking for frugality. Technodiversity, again, is just a way of thinking, and aims to bring focus on relations, but then yes, you cannot, I think, quantify the whole of resources and energy that it uses. And that's the same question as quantifying the resources and energy that technology uses today. That's very hard to have an accurate and precise quantification. And you can consider that technodiversity already exists. The question and what I am for is to to look maybe at technology now through this angle that I don't think was the case here until now.
Next question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. To be honest, this is really striking to me since most of my work consists in doing energy optimization. But I see some convergence. That is to say, I can say that optimization is quite a bad idea since it can be really anti-democratic if you just rely on that. In the end, the human actors are, they do have the knowledge and they do in the end make the decision, so they should be the one deciding. But my conclusion until now was optimization can lead the decision, and in the end, human actors decide for a satisfactory solution. And so I wanted to have your view on whether we should get rid of any optimization, or can it still lead to some sort of suboptimal satisfactory solutions?
No, optimization, I think, can still be useful, but as long as it is not the ultimate thing that is solved for, that is not the ultimate goal. Here, I may go a bit further in the argumentation of Olivier Hamon, who make the difference between viability analysis and optimizations. I didn't consider that this part of his argumentation was very clear. So what I will say is whether my interpretation, my understanding of it. But as I understand it, he makes a strong difference between the two because when you optimize something, you put value on one variable that is that will be the aim. The aim will be to make it as little as possible. Well, you're the expert, but so there is a value that is a priori put on the particular variables. And the strong difference that I think he makes between that and viability analysis is that in modeling toward viability, the aim is to produce some scenarios that are variables. And so there is no emphasis, no value put on one or on a few variables a priori, but just range of acceptable variations of that value. So it is maybe more related to an opening of possibilities and maybe more easy then to make contribution of this kind of study to democratic choices rather than merely optimization.
Thank you. So one here, just to see how many questions we have. So one there, one there.
Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, do you know any object or technology that is already taking this path toward diversity or toward sub-optimality?
Yes. No. So I had a hidden slide who was talking about the movement of low-tech. And this movement gave us a variety of initiatives that promote low-impact technology and reappropriation of technology. So what is promoted is people that can develop methods, plans, know-hows for their own needs, for their own values and view of technology, of what they need, and then share them freely so that people can as well use them, and more than just use them, can transfer them, can adapt them to their own need, to their own situation. And so in this way, these movements are promoted a technological diversity, the creation of a technological diversity. So as a reference, you can refer to the Low-Tech Lab or the Low-Tech magazine if you want some examples.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Pauline. As usual, it's a pleasure to hear you. I've got a question to the PhD student you are. Mm-hmm. You mix concepts from philosophy, engineering. You added concepts from biology. How will you survive to your PhD?
I don't know. I'm still alive, I believe. Well, that's a very good question, because actually what I was glad about in this presentation, it is that maybe for the first time from the beginning of my PhD, I had the feeling that I was really taking advantage of my both curriculum, engineering, and philosophy. I don't think that a PhD student just in philosophy that has not studied engineering would have had the same view as I have developed here in regard of life cycle, in transformation, and so on. But that's something that was a bit frustrating during my first year and a half, is that I had the feeling that I was doing just philosophy, and I put very much effort in it because I have a master in engineering and just bachelor in philosophy. But I had the impression that it was there that I had to put more energy. So I'm feeling that just now I'm beginning to bringing the both really together in my PhD, and I hope that I will achieve my PhD like that.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for your talk, and really sorry if I misunderstood what you were about to say. My question is about the responsibility in the ethics. If we are in some scenario when we cannot predict technological evolution and technological progress, and this kind of scares me in some way, because this whole conclusion seems like to me like an appeal to nature, and I really talk a lot of capitalist tech guru, and when you are saying to them, okay, technologies and evolution you cannot control, they are really happy because they have no responsibility. And so what are you aware of the responsibility in ethics, and how can we manage them in this scenario?
Okay, so thank you. It's a very good question. I have two remarks. First is that regarding our current model of technology, the responsibility, I think, is maybe, how to say, diluate?
Spread.
Yeah, okay. And so in this way, it's dilution. Among the various actors and stakeholders in an engineering project. When you're speaking of a car, for example, or of a very, very important project, there are so many stakeholders, so many firms that are involved in it, that it is already hard to identify the responsible. And then what happens of this question if we consider technodiversity, so that we assume that technological transformation and future evolution cannot be predicted, I think an answer can be found in an article that I read and really liked about ethics that promoted the virtue of mindfulness. And actually, this virtue of mindfulness is an answer to the fact that we cannot elaborate and precise strong cause-consequence chain of events that would lead to the identification of a responsible. And so mindfulness is a virtue, so is a personal trait to be developed, to be encouraged in this view. And is the diffuse knowledge that what you are doing have impact on that and that and that, even if it's a long distance, even if you cannot have the whole line of cause consequences in mind. And so this virtue then is to adapt your behavior with this mindfulness, so with this feeling, this diffuse knowledge that it has this impacts, even if you cannot reconstruct the whole cause consequences chain. So from a law point of view, I have no idea whether this can be useful, but that's actually a line of thought that seems interesting to me.
We have a little bit more time for questions, in case someone would like to ask something.
If no other question, I have one, but yeah, indeed, if there is still. Thanks a lot. That was indeed a very interesting talk. I think 2 talks this morning were really interesting. I have one which is maybe more on the philosophical thing, as Emmanuel introduced a few minutes before. So you have a quite strong background in engineering, then you went to philosophy, and then I would say that the kind of conclusion is like we need to do differently, and that's also why we kind of started the doctoral school 3 years ago. At first, we were only engineers, and I know everyone is not engineers here, but I would say that the conclusion at that time was there is something wrong, and we feel like we are trying to answer and improve the question from years ago, from decades, trying to go better that direction, but it's maybe not the question that are relevant with our time, what you kind of highlighted saying we should do differently. My question would be, how would you envision like the background that engineers or the work that engineers would need to do, so the role of engineers in the future? I know that it might not be interesting for everyone, but it's like kind of seeking for help or asking what kind of interface engineers would need to be able to answer our time question.
For me, the essential point is to move away from the techno-solutionist view, that is that technology only brings a solution. Technology modifies the situation, modifies the possibilities for the future. And so they just not solve a problem. They may do, but it is not a necessity. And they may as well pose other problem. They may reframe the way we see the situations. And so I think that from this point of view, future engineers should think maybe not as just them bringing solution or bringing profit as well, but maybe have interfaces with sociology, with anthropology, maybe with philosophy. I mean, it was my entry point, to have that in mind and to reflect on technology, not just in technical terms, but as well in social technical terms, in environmental terms, and focus on the interrelations of all of that, and have that in mind when they are designing.
Okay, and so in practice, I know I'm a bit picky on that question, but I mean, I think I totally agree with your point. But I would ask, how do you do? Because it would mean kind of let it go partially on efficiency and improving things, and so going to the interface. But then, like, what would you ask engineer being like? So you mean in education or?
Yes, I meant in education first, to have that in mind before they enter firms, as well because of the fact that for the moment in firms, the approach is mainly centered on profits and techno-solutionism. But then, if they have the freedom to do it, if they can do it in their working environment, what I would like to see, maybe a day, is collaboration between people in human sciences, in sociology, in anthropology, because engineers can have some insights in this disciplines, but they cannot master it, of course. Engineering is a full curriculum. It takes 5 years to become an engineer. You cannot ask them to be as well, to have as well a master in sociology, a master in anthropology, or I don't know. But if they have a possibility to maybe invite other people, other disciplines on their project board to have their views as well on the projects, they maybe bring this perspective and move in this direction.
Okay, I would say that was at first the objective of the doctoral school, which I think we failed some part along the way. And so this is maybe an open question for people that are not engineers here, would be, please come in, like we are just trying to come to the interface, but please come in and let us let engineer people how they should change the way they practice from your own discipline. I think that would be something very valuable that we can get out of weeks like this. I don't know if anyone else would like to talk. No? Okay.
Okay, I think we're at the end of this session. We have a couple quick announcement. That's why it's good to have a few more minutes. So big round of applause to Pauline. Thank you so much.